to all my nerd friends in Latin America. Greetings from a fellow nerd in the United States. We're at a wonderful conference. It's now in its 10th year, and I hope that there will be many more years to come. It's a real pleasure for me to talk today for a minute or two about my friend Ken Thompson, who was a colleague at Bell Labs for many years. Ken doesn't do many interviews, so you're actually very lucky to be able to see this brand new one that was recorded especially for you. I don't remember now when I first met Ken, but it was probably in around 1967 when we both had more hair and it was darker. But I do have some very fond memories of those early days. Not all about technology, but often about just how kind and generous Ken was with everyone. As you probably know, Ken was a pioneer in computer chess. His computer chess machine, Bell, was the first to obtain a master ranking. As part of that, Ken used to go to a local chess club near his home and mine in New Jersey every week, where players would simply try to beat his program. We used that to refine the algorithms. I used to take my son to that same club every week. One night, my son, who was at the time maybe 8 or 9 years old, challenged Ken to play a game. Now, Ken never played chess himself. He just wanted competition to help improve his programs. But he agreed to play my son, and they played a real game with two human players. I don't remember at this point who won, but I do know that in many, many years of watching Ken in chess settings, it's the only time I ever saw him play a game himself. He was just being a nice person, kind and generous to a young kid. And it's with that same generous spirit that he agreed to record the interview that you're about to watch. I hope that you will enjoy it.
I'm Ken Thompson. I am known for writing UNIX in a previous lifetime. My early childhood was American military brat, and I lived in the 12 grades, first through 12th. I went to 14 schools and approximately the same number of different households. So never had a home until I went to college, and at college, it's the first kind of permanent place I ever had. I went to the University of California at Berkeley, and I was not a good student. I was a poor student. I nearly flunked out, and then in upper division in junior and senior year and graduate year, I got good. I flourished, but it took a long time to get there. You didn't turn it off in those days. There were these monster computers that took multi-kilowatts of power, and they heated rooms. And it was dangerous to turn them off because they would break when you turn them off. So they kept them on 24/7. And but they only had 3 shifts of work to do, 2 shifts of work. So they ran the computers from 8 a.m. to midnight, and then they were available from midnight to 8. Normally they just sat in a dark room, but eventually, through perseverance and just being around, I got a key and I could go in anytime after midnight and use it like a personal computer. It was, it's the size of a large house. Yes, I did. A teacher who became a very good friend of mine left Bell Labs to teach for a year, 2 years maybe, at Berkeley. And those were my years of graduating. And he actually enrolled me in graduate school. I didn't apply for graduate school at all. And he enrolled me, and so I had 1 year of graduate school, got a master's degree in it, and then he went back to Bell Labs at the same time that I was recruited by Bell Labs and went back to Bell Labs. And then at Bell Labs, we were really good friends. We did a lot of collaboration kind of stuff. But then he left Bell Labs and came back to Berkeley and became a professor of, I don't know what they call him, a mixed professor of mathematics and computer science. I avoided the recruiter because I just wasn't in the mood to go to work. I wanted to just kind of hang around the university and be a professional student, I guess is the word. And he finally chased me down after a full week of interviews. You know, he came to interview all the students. And after a full week, he chased me down, basically, I believe, but I'm not sure, on the recommendation of this friend of mine. The friend is Elwin Burlekamp, and he died just a year or two ago, which is a shame. And he chased me down at home. He came and knocked on my front door, and I guess he called that a recruiting. And then I got a request to go and interview at Bell Labs, and I went, and again, not wanting a job at all, I saw the people there, and I was so impressed by the people, and it was like home. I don't know how to describe it, but it was really easy, and it wasn't a place where you worked. It was a place where you did what you wanted to do, which is exactly what I was doing at Berkeley, except that I'd be paid for it. And so I said yes when I went in recruiting, and I lasted 34 years at Bell Laboratories. Yes, and that's part of what I was hired for. Multic is a big project, and it was over-designed and under-implemented. I think it was destined to fail if it hadn't been supported by the government. The government was absolutely demanding a secure operating system. Bell Labs dropped out because it just wasn't fulfilling their expectation. But the government didn't drop out, and MIT, and it ended up with MIT and the producing it for the government. They'd spent a tremendous amount of money on it, and got nothing out of it, absolutely nothing. And in those days, operating systems came with a computer, so there were no two operating systems from different manufacturers that had anything compatible. And so you ended up totally wrapping yourself around one manufacturer, and were stuck essentially forever. It was part of the way the manufacturers worked in those days. And they thought that was good enough, because with the computer came hardware engineers and software engineers and people who would debug your programs for you and everything. So it was like full service for computing. Anyway, I guess part of what we did was change that model. We stole a computer and did operating systems work on it, and through that earned the right, again, but mostly by lying, by subterfuge. We were able to do what we actually wanted to do against the will of the company. And then when they found that we had what would today be called an app, the operating system was just something that supported the app, and the app was filing, maintaining, and editing patent applications, which is really Bell Labs' job as an industry. They're the research arm of the telephone company, and their job was to do patents. And when the operating system, which was unsung, supported a patent documentation system, then we delivered that to the patent department, and then got our own machine based on that, and then it was off. We could do anything we wanted after that. There was no restrictions, no recriminations, no nothing. I'd started doing research on a disk scheduling algorithm, trying to get really high throughput through a disk on an unused machine that was just lying around. And slowly I had to build up the little pieces of an operating system. I didn't know it, but I wanted test programs to drive the disk. And so I had test programs. I had to store those programs on the disk, which is a file system. And then I had to run the disk, which is, with the file system. And basically, it was an operating system, but it couldn't support itself. So I wrote an assembler and a loader and an editor, and then it could support itself. And that happened in very quick time, but it was a realization that what I had was 90% of an operating system, and in 3 weeks I could turn it into an operating system, which for the first time was the actual goal. Before that, it was a disk scheduling algorithm. Recruiting is a hard word. Basically, it was a fun machine, and I think all of us had our pet projects. Operating systems wasn't our goal. Our goal was to build something we could use to write programs. And Dennis and I collaborated on a program called Space Travel that you push buttons to fly a little spaceship around the solar system. It had all the moons at that time, the moons that we knew, right? Things are different now. And with real-time gravity, real-time time. But there was an exponential knob that would double or halve the scale of the whole thing. And the scale, you could call it gravity, you could call it time, you could call it speed, whatever you want to call it. And basically you push that button and it's like, running the projector at twice the speed. And you do it like 10 times, and then you could go from Earth to Jupiter in a fraction. And then slow it back down, and then orbit Jupiter and land or go to one of Jupiter's moons. So it was just fun, and it was a simulated floating point. The machine we used didn't have floating points, so it was and the algorithm had to be, especially when you run at very, very high speeds. You're orbiting the Earth like once a second, and it had to be very sensitive about energy, and had to be fed back. Even floating point round-off would destroy the energy in the orbit, right? And things would go wrong. So you had to kind of detect the energy and feed it back into the algorithm so that it was totally zero-sum. And anyway, that's just on the side. So those are basically, and it was fun. It was a lot of people played it. Doug McElroy wrote a compiler called TMG, and then he wrote the compiler in TMG, so it was self-contained and self-reproducing on this horrible little machine. And I wrote in TMG a language called B, and then I rewrote it in B. So so you can think of each of these as a process. And then Dennis wanted to move B to the main comp center for all of Bell Labs, and turned it into a real compiler instead of an interpreter. So he took B, and in the rewrite we called it NewB, NB. He called it NewB. And now he's pretty much on his own. I'm alone. And he eventually started expanding the language. And then when PDP-11s came in, when we were able to get and move into PDP-11, brand new computers, he B was just horrible language for that. It was a word-oriented language. You'd add words, you'd store words, you'd go indirect through words, but bytes were just horrible. You know, if you had to emulate bytes, you had to end up putting a byte in a whole word or doing something very horrible. And so he basically put types in NB all by himself. He did that, and then targeted it towards the PDP-11. And at some point, in the meantime, the PDP-11 was UNIX was written at that point, and in assembly language for the PDP-11. Dennis wrote the assembler for that, by the way. Then we got together and decided that the goal all along was to have this operating system written in the operating system language. And so we started with NB and put in all the stuff, you know. Dennis did all the work, but we collaborated in what features we want. And he'd come back with a running, you know, program compiler. And I personally tried to write UNIX from scratch in this new language and failed. I failed twice. Just couldn't keep it all the pieces juggling in the air. And then finally, in the collaboration between Dennis and I, he put structures in the language very similar to the way they are now. And with that, then I did the third rewrite, and it worked. I got it running. It was actually pretty easy. And when B became mature enough, that B, and then at that point it was called we called it C, and then C didn't actually it had newer features by and large, but the bulk of it was that original new B featured with structures finally, and then it became our programming language for the PDP-11 for subsystems and more compilers and more loaders, more everything. 72 was the rewrite, yes, from assembly language to C, and then after that, what has been known to become version 7, I restructured the typing system and the sharing system to be portable, what I thought was portable. And not me, but Dennis and Steve Johnson ordered a computer that was designed to be, its major feature was it was not a PDP-11, okay? So that it would actually, that porting to it would be something, right? It wouldn't be just another name for PDP-11. And it was an Interdata 832, which was a very IBM-oriented computer. And then they successfully ported C and Unix to the Interdata 832. And then portability took off. Everybody took a version of that and ported it to some. In those days, microcomputers, you know, there were new chips announced almost monthly. There was a National Semiconductor had a couple. Oh geez, I can't remember. There were hundreds and there were tons of new chips, and every Silicon Valley company would take a new chip because the latest one was the fastest one, and build a computer around it, and then say, "Oh, now what do we do?" And they say, "Oh, we'll port Unix." And so these Unix clones came out by the dozens, and anyway, that's basically the story of how Unix got popular. Unix wars, but it was mainly there was a long period of time in the 70s when computers didn't get faster. For some reason, you were just limited by the CPU memory interface, and they were all, you know, kind of, the fastest ones were like a half a microsecond cycle time, and then after that, I assume it was semiconductor mostly, in cache and algorithms, they started getting really fast, really fast. Like I remember we were on a half microsecond machine, and suddenly there was a MIPS machine that came out that was 20 million cycles per second, right? And you can laugh at that now, but you know then that was a factor of 20 more than what we were used to, and so we switched to it. And but every machine after that was faster and faster and faster. It was where Moore's law was applied to hardware and not software for a substantial period of time. The teaching, I ran away to Berkeley and taught for a year, and all of that was on PDP-11, written in C. And the John Lyons from the University of New South Wales made a two-pamphlet book, two separate pamphlets. One was just a listing of the operating system with line numbers, and the other was a total description of how it fit together and worked, referring to the line numbers. And that, I think, was the big teaching jump. After that, everybody I knew had a Xerox copy of those books. Well, those books were outlawed by Bell Labs because they're proprietary. You know, it's basically a book of the source code of UNIX, and so they restricted the sale of it to John Lyons and his students. So that was the original source, that you'd go into the bookshop in New South Wales and get these books. You bring it home and Xerox it for your friends, and they would Xerox it for their friends. And some of these copies of these books were so out of proportion. Like they were, twice as tall as they were wide as far as the fonts and things. But I think that was the big thing in education in universities. We abandoned Unix at the Bell Labs, the Unix group, and we wrote operating systems called Plan 9 and some things like that, and a language that went with it, and we were off doing our own things, trying to change the form of computing. We wanted a totally dumb bitmap screen at home with no real computer in it, just one powerful enough to draw bits on the screen, and then we'd communicate over slow lines, because that's what was available, to the computing facility. And we wanted the same language and operating system on both the computing, well, all three. There were kind of three big components. There was the desktop screen, the terminal. There was the computing facility, which is big machines that you could just replace when a bigger one came, and a file system that they would all work through. And the architecture of Plan 9 was around that thing where you could work from home, pretending like you were on a high-speed machine in a big computer center over a narrow wire, and get massive file system, because most of the file system transfer was from the computer, the CPU machine, to the file system machine. And so it turned out to be just really a great deal for the balance of power in computing at those days. Anyway, that's what we were doing, and you're off, inventing the world and through Silicon Valley, and we were just in that. We were researching operating systems, and we went on doing other things.